My name is Santiago Aparicio. I'm professor of physical and theoretical chemistry at the University of Burgos and ICRAM. And we are going to talk about the in silico design and characterization of novel catalysts, summarizing the research that we are doing into the Nefertiti project. The topics that we are going to talk today are summarized in this slide. First of all, we will give a short introduction about the basis of in silico methodology without using mathematical apparatus. We will describe the main computational methods, and we will see the different approaches that we are using into the Nefertiti project for defining the new catalyst that we are designing into this research. First of all, I would like to clarify what we call in silico design of materials. In silico design of material is a new research area in which we study the properties, we predict the properties of the materials using computers. Basically, if we consider the traditional approach to the study of the properties of materials, in which we consider experimental laboratories, in which we have the real materials, we have equipment to measure the properties, our approach is considering laboratories based on supercomputers. Basically, we study the properties, we predict the properties using computing methods, which underneath it, they have physical and theoretical based methodology. So this is a new kind of experimentation. Although we call in silico methodologies, we design materials using computers. But the approach is totally complementary to the experimental laboratories in the sense that we can study the properties of the materials, predicting the properties without fabricating the materials, and then we find the best solution that we study in the laboratory. So basically, the in silico and the experimental approaches are totally complementary. They are not isolated, they are complementary in the sense that we can study huge collections of materials in computers, then select the most suitable materials for each application, and then go to the laboratory to confirm their properties and to validate our methodologies. When we talk about in silico prediction of materials, in silico study of the properties of materials, we talk about computational methodology in chemistry and physics. So these are the two main areas in which we use the fundamentals of chemistry and the fundamentals of physics to design the materials. But this kind of theoretical approach considers many different areas of research. Obviously, beyond chemistry and physics, we have also mathematics, in which we have a huge collection of numerical methods that we are using to solve the problems that we are considering in chemistry and physics fundamented research. It also requires a large background of computational science. Basically, we carry out our simulations, our study in huge high-performance supercomputers. So this is another pivotal role, mathematics, chemistry, physics, and computational and software engineering. And it's also applied not only to problems related with chemistry, physics, and materials, but also to many different areas like biology, medicine, pharmacy, or geology. So using this approach, we can study, design, and approach to materials with many different kind of possible application in different research areas. The approach is summarized in this slide. We are not going to use any mathematical description because they are extremely complex, but basically we use high-performance supercomputers, which is something similar to the picture that you may find on the left of the picture. They are something like a combination of many small computers in a large one. So the computational power is increased very largely because this kind of problems require a lot of computational power. They cannot be solved at a small computer like the one that we use at home. Underneath it, we have a lot of physics and chemistry-based methods that we use to describe in three main groups. We will describe it later. The first of all is what we call first principle methods, which are based on quantum mechanics. They are the most reliable, the most fundamental one, but they are extremely time-consuming because they are based on quantum mechanics. If we go upstairs, we will find the second kind of methodology, which is what we call classical mechanics simulation, mainly what we call molecular dynamics simulation, in which we can simulate a larger system, more complicated materials, but losing a certain amount of accuracy. And then we go to what we call semi-empirical method. All this kind of physics and chemistry-based method, they are programmed, they are established into the supercomputer, and they provide what we call results. What we call results can be anything. It can be a property of the material, it can be a proposal of a new material turned to a particular requirement. It can be anything. Depending on the method, depending on the material, we can predict any kind of property. The fundamentals of all these calculations, when we go to the bottom, when we go to the most accurate physics, are based on quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is a new paradigm in physics, which was established at the beginning of the 20th century. It's more than 100 years ago when we start to work with this kind of approach. It was a complete revolution in terms of new physics. Basically, it describes the properties of any kind of material in a completely different approach when we compare with the classical mechanical based on Newton method. The basis of all this kind of calculation is the equation that you may see in the picture in the central region of the slide, which is what we call a Schrödinger equation. In this particular case, the time-independent Schrödinger equation, in which we describe the state of any kind of material, of any kind of system, based on the description of mainly the electrons in terms of the position, the energy, and the probability to find in a place in the space. This equation, which seems pretty simple, as you see, is composed of, in theory, four terms. The first one, which is named as H, is what we call Hamiltonian, and the two key properties as what we call wave function, which is the phi that you may find in the equation, and the energy. They are related through this equation. This equation seems pretty simple, but in reality it's pretty complicated, because solving this equation in a very accurate way, it requires a huge amount of computational resources, and it can be applied only to very small systems. When we talk in materials about a small system, we talk about systems with few electrons, with few atoms. If we try to apply it to solve it at a large system, as systems with a large number of atoms or electrons, is pretty difficult to be solved. So, although in theory we can apply this kind of equation to predict the properties of any kind of system, of any kind of material, in the practical way, we can only use it for a small system, for systems with a small number of atoms, with a small number of electrons. To avoid this kind of problem in which we have the fundamentals, we have the physics, but solving this equation, applying this equation is extremely complex, we adopt a complementary approach, which is what we call multi-scale material modeling, in which we apply different kind of methodologies, not only the previous one, not only the quantum mechanics one that we have shown in the previous slide, but also additional simulations with different theoretical approach, which allow us to simulate a larger systems with a large number of atoms, phenomena which require longer simulation times, and it provides information that we may require for any kind of application. So on the basis, it would be, as you can see in the center of the slide, the first principle simulation, those based on quantum mechanics, and from that we evolved to another kind of application. The first one that we previously mentioned is the classical molecular dynamics simulation, in which we apply classical Newtonian mechanics applied to materials, applied to atoms, applied to molecules, and modifications of these, let's say, classical mechanical approaches, in which we consider different methodologies, not quantum mechanics, but modification of classical mechanics, which allow us to study large systems. For example, if you want to study a biological system, proteins, cell membranes, this kind of material, which contain a huge amount of atoms, we cannot approach to it using first principles. So what we use is systems or methodologies based on classical molecular dynamics, something like the one that you can see on the picture, what we call docking studies, for example. We can also use another kind of theoretical approaches, also based on the combination of classical mechanics and mathematical modeling, like the one that we call kinetic Monte Carlo, in which we apply to very large systems to study, for example, catalytic processes, to study dissolution processes, to study more complex processes. So, in this way, we apply this methodology for study and design new materials. So, the new paradigm in materials science is to use in silico design, to use in silico methodologies to design materials. The previous approach, which was completely experimental, tried to find a particular material for a particular industrial application using at the end a trial and error approach. So it requires a lot of time, it requires a lot of economic resources, and it was very consuming. So it was pretty difficult to find a solution for finding a particular material, a particular molecule for a particular application. It may take, with the previous approaches, up to 20 or 30 years to find a solution for a particular problem. So it was a huge problem. With the in silico approach, what we do is we screen, we study large collection of materials without having it in the reality. So we try to establish a structure of the materials, design new molecules in silico in our computers. We predict their properties for the particular application, and then we see the most suitable approaches. Once we find the most suitable molecule, the most suitable material, we go to the lab and then study the properties in the real world. But all the design, all the screening material is done previously, is done at lower cost, at a lower, let's say, time consuming, because it may take, I don't know, 1 year or something like that for screening thousands of materials, whereas this kind of experimental study could take 10 or 20 years more in the real laboratory. So it's a real change in the paradigm in which we can screen largest amount of materials at a lower cost. For example, in the picture you may see the design of two-dimensional materials which were discovered like 20 years ago, whose properties, whose modification has been studied in silico in order to find how their properties can be fine-tuned in silico through the combination of different material properties. In the particular case of the Nefertiti project, this is a European project in which we are trying to design a new material for solving a very relevant environmental problem. We know that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has skyrocketed this last 20 years because of anthropogenic emissions. So we have a large amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, which we need to remove and we need to use for some industrial application. Our approach is to capture the CO2 from the atmosphere and use it as a raw material for producing fuels, what we call solar fuels. In this project, we have designed it, and when I say design it, I mean that we have prepared, first of all, in silico the material using our computational procedures to combine the CO2 molecules, the one that you can see on the left of the slide, with water molecules in order to react with this catalyst under certain conditions to produce small alcohols. For example, ethanol, which you can see on the right of the slide. This kind of molecules can be used as green fuels for vehicles, for different particular applications. So the scope of the project is taking the carbon dioxide and produce a new material, then solving the problem of CO2 in the atmosphere, and then producing a valuable product. So the key in this process is to find a suitable material, because this reaction, the reaction that we seek, it may seem pretty simple. The reaction between the carbon dioxide and the CO2 is at the end extremely complicated, in the sense that it's very difficult to convert this kind of gases into ethanol, for example, because it requires the formation of carbon-carbon new bonds, which are very difficult to be obtained in absence of the proper catalyst. So what we have done in the project is we have designed a new material that you can see on the top of the slide, which is a two-dimensional material. It's like something like a monolayer, which is what we call covalent organic framework. This material is produced by the combination of different puzzle pieces, which are combined, producing something like a layer with holes in the middle, in which we place what you can see on the bottom of the slide, metallic nanoparticles. So we produce the two-dimensional material and we combine it with metallic nanoparticles. In this particular project, we found the best solution was gold nanoparticle plus ruthenium oxide nanoparticles. So the combination of the properties of the two-dimensional material and this kind of metal nanoparticles produce a very good reaction and produce a high conversion of the CO2 into the ethanol. So the in silico approach allows to infer the most suitable combination of the two-dimensional materials and the nanoparticles, and then predict the properties. This is a clear advantage because the preparation of this kind of two-dimensional material is extremely complex in the laboratory. So we cannot screen a large amount of possible two-dimensional materials, because synthesize one of these materials to find the right synthesis condition, it may take up to 1 or 2 years. So if we are able to define which are the best combination, we will go to the selected one, and only this one will be prepared in the lab. And this way, we have been able to find the most suitable solution for this kind of material. So this is our approach, in the sense that we are able to predict the properties, to allow to confirm the ability to produce the product that we want, and also to characterize the full materials. For example, in the slide, you can see the structure of the material on the center of the slide, which is predicted by the in silico methodology. We have confirmed the planarity, we have confirmed the properties in terms of the structure. You can see on the left the spectroscopic properties, you can see on the right the XRD properties, the structure of the material, and the electronic properties, which allow us to predict the reaction mechanism. All these properties has been predicted, so they have been calculated. We don't need any kind of experimental equipment, we don't need to synthesize the equipment, we don't need to synthesize the materials, and we can use it as a predictive tool. So at the end, we have found that this material is suitable for this kind of catalyst, and this material has been prepared into the project by other partners of the project, and we have confirmed the suitability for converting CO2 into ethanol. So as a conclusion of our description, we can say that this kind of in silico methodologies can be applied to any kind of particular problem using different approaches. So we can go to the bottom if we need very accurate prediction, like the one that we have needed for Nefertiti predictions using quantum mechanics, or we can go to less complex materials prediction like classical mechanics or statistical mechanics for a huge amount of material. So this example that we have shown for two-dimensional materials into the Nefertiti project is extended in another kind of project to simulation involving, for example, biological molecules, protein and enzyme interactions, reaction on different kinds of surfaces, systems for photocatalysis, like photochemistry in reactions, and behavior of materials in solution. So this is a clear advantage in terms of prediction ability, design of materials, which allow us to design materials at low cost and at low time. So in silico design of material is the new paradigm in materials design. So this is the research that we are doing at ICRAN into this project, but this is something that is used into the in silico approach for many kind of different projects into different design of materials, and allow us to research many different kind of experimental and theoretical problems. That's all for now, sir. Thank you very much.